Most people try to lose visceral fat by eating less, and you hear it all the time, you just gotta cut the calories. And that works to an extent, but the data shows something that completely flips that approach. Caloric restriction, in practical terms, has a ceiling, and after a certain point, you just stop seeing much additional visceral fat loss, because as you lose weight, your body starts defending against any additional weight loss. It's an evolutionary survival mechanism, and your body sees fat loss as a threat, so it slows the system down. So you burn fewer calories at rest, and you move less even without realizing it. Your body temperature can drop, and your hunger and your food noise get louder. So starving yourself is not the answer here. When it comes to visceral fat, adding the right foods is just as important. Because to lose visceral fat, we actually need to add foods that target the specific signals that help create visceral fat in the first place. And when you combine the right foods with the right kind of exercise, the response becomes dose dependent, which means the more of the right signals that you send, the more visceral fat you lose, and you do it much faster. And that changes how you should approach this whole thing, because visceral fat is not just belly fat. It sits deep inside your abdomen. It wraps around your liver and your stomach and your pancreas and your other internal organs. And visceral fat is metabolically active, so it continuously pumps out inflammatory signals. And these signals disrupt your hormones, and they actually create this self-reinforcing loop that eventually leads to things like type 2 diabetes and heart disease and cancer and even dementia. So in this video, I want to walk you through the exact protocol, the specific foods that target visceral fat through 3 different biological mechanisms. And then we'll talk about the exercise piece that becomes the multiplier on top of all of that. And I'll show you how you can cut your visceral fat nearly in half in just 8 weeks. And if you're new here, I'm Dr. Leonid. I'm a double board certified physician, and on this channel, my mission is to give you the science and practical tools to live longer and feel better. And standard disclaimer, even though I'm a physician, I'm not your physician. So please talk to your doctor before making any changes to your health regimen, as this video is educational only and not medical advice. So the reason this protocol works is that it targets the exact mechanisms that keep visceral fat locked in place. And there are 3 of them. And the first one is inflammation. Visceral fat is not just sitting there storing energy, it's actually actively inflamed. The fat cells themselves release inflammatory molecules called cytokines. So they release things like TNF-alpha and interleukin-6, and this creates a feedback loop. The fat drives inflammation, and the inflammation makes the fat more resistant to being broken down. So visceral fat, in a sense, protects itself by staying inflamed. But when you bring that inflammation down, you actually break that cycle. So then all that stored fat becomes much easier for your body to mobilize and burn. And there are 2 levers I want to focus on here, because you need both to break the cycle that keeps visceral fat stuck in place. The first lever is omega-3s, and a good food to add here is walnuts. Walnuts are rich in polyunsaturated fats, especially alpha-linoleic acid, or ALA, which is just a plant-based omega-3 fat. And omega-3s directly calm down those inflammatory signals coming from visceral fat. And then another strong source of omega-3s is fatty fish. So it'll be things like salmon or sardines or mackerel. Those are rich in EPA and DHA, and they also help with insulin sensitivity and fatty liver. And the second layer here is polyphenols. And walnuts actually help here too, because walnuts are not just rich in omega-3s, they also contain a lot of polyphenols. These compounds help in a different way. Polyphenols improve how fat is handled and burned, so your body shifts more toward burning energy instead of storing it. And there was an interesting randomized control trial where researchers compared 3 groups. There was a standard healthy diet group, and then there was a standard Mediterranean diet, and then there was a greener, more polyphenol-rich Mediterranean diet. So both Mediterranean groups got a small handful of walnuts per day, about 28 grams or just 1/4 of a cup. But the greener Mediterranean version also added green tea, a daily monk eye shake, and less processed and red meat. And when they measured visceral fat by MRI, the greener, polyphenol-rich Mediterranean group lost almost double the visceral fat compared to the regular Mediterranean group. And this is already showing you why this goes beyond calories in and calories out. Both groups were eating the same number of calories, but the group that added more polyphenol-rich foods lost more than double the visceral fat. Same calories, but very different results. Because the type of food changes how your body processes this energy and how it stores this energy. Now, for most people in the US, we don't have an easy access to mankai or mankei. I actually don't really know how to pronounce it. I only learned about this from this study, but apparently it's a marine plant, a type of duckweed. But in practical terms, we just want to push our nutrition in a more polyphenol-rich direction with things like leafy greens or berries. But just keep in mind, mankai is not just rich in polyphenols, it's also a complete source of protein. So if we really wanted to replicate this, we still want to get adequate protein somewhere else. Now, the second mechanism that keeps visceral fat locked in place is insulin resistance. When your body becomes resistant to insulin, your cells just stop responding to it efficiently. So your pancreas is forced to pump out more and more insulin to try to clear all that excess glucose in the blood. And chronically elevated insulin directly promotes fat storage, especially around your organs. This is why people with insulin resistance also tend to disproportionately accumulate fat around the abdomen and around those internal organs, even when their total calorie intake hasn't changed. So anything that improves how your body responds to insulin is going to make it easier to clear visceral fat. And there are two really good foods to do this, but they do it in two very different pathways. And the first one is broccoli sprouts, and this is probably the most underrated food on this list. Broccoli sprouts are packed with a compound called sulforaphane. It's a compound that activates a pathway called NRF2. And NRF2 is like this internal control center for inflammation and oxidative stress. When NRF2 turns on, it actually activates a whole network of genes that protects your mitochondria, and they reduce inflammation at the cellular level. And this is just as important. Sulforaphane also tells the liver to slow down gluconeogenesis, which is when your liver produces new glucose on its own. So now you're getting better blood sugar control from two different directions all at once. Now, why broccoli sprouts and not regular broccoli? Because broccoli sprouts have anywhere from 20 to 100 times more sulforaphane precursors than the mature vegetable. So just a small handful of sprouts can deliver more sulforaphane than an entire head of broccoli. And most people can get good benefits with about a half a cup per day, ideally raw or mixed into a salad, or you can even blend it into a smoothie. But an important side note, sulforaphane clears your system pretty quickly. So ideally, we want to eat just a little bit, but every day, as opposed to big loads once a week. Now, in terms of where to find them, some grocery stores carry broccoli sprouts in the produce section. It's usually near herbs and microgreens, but the availability could be hit or miss depending on where you live. So if you can't find them at a grocery store, or if you want a cheaper alternative, they're actually very easy to grow at home. You just need a mason jar and some broccoli sprouting seeds, and you can grow them in about 5 days. There's lots of tutorials on YouTube that are pretty easy to follow, and it costs a fraction of what you pay at the store. And broccoli sprouts aren't the only food that moves the needle on insulin signaling. Other high-yield foods would be something like dark chocolate, but it has to be dark chocolate with at least an 85% or higher cacao content. And then we always talk about them, but berries are also very good for that. And then don't forget fermented foods like kimchi and sauerkraut. All of them have evidence behind them for improving insulin sensitivity, but they all work through different pathways. Okay, now let's talk about the third mechanism. So we talked about breaking the inflammation cycle and then fixing that insulin signaling. But your body also needs the signal to actually start burning stored fat. So this is where extra virgin olive oil comes in. The polyphenols in olive oil activate two specific pathways. The first one is your AMPK pathway, which is basically your body's energy sensor. When AMPK turns on, it tells your cells to start pulling from fat stores and burning them for fuel. And then the second pathway is called the SIRT1 pathway. So this one improves how efficiently your mitochondria operate, especially in your muscles. So not only does your body get the signal to burn fat, it actually gets better at doing it. And there's a study published in the European Journal of Nutrition that showed this exact pattern. So this was a double-blind, randomized control trial where they compared extra virgin olive oil to soybean oil. So both groups ate the same number of calories, and they had the same calorie deficit. And the result was the olive oil group lost 80% more body fat than the soybean oil group, all with just 25 milliliters per day, which is about 1.5 tablespoons. So same calories and same deficit, but completely different outcomes, because olive oil was telling the body to burn more fat. And that's the deeper point here. The quality of the calories can lead to very different outcomes even when the calorie math looks identical. So that's the food piece in this protocol. Now, if you go a step further and you add exercise, that's where the results can start to compound, and this is how you can start losing visceral fat much quicker. In some cases, just weeks. But there is an important layer to this. There was a large meta-analysis of 84 studies that compared every major type of exercise to see which ones actually reduce visceral fat. And the ones that came out on top were exercises that were done at higher intensity. So this would be vigorous intensity aerobic exercise and high intensity interval training. And there was a study published in Diabetes Care that showed just how powerful this can be. So in their study protocol, just 2 45-minute cycling sessions per week at moderate to vigorous intensity, plus an additional intermittent training session, so 3 sessions per week total, reduced visceral fat by 48%, almost half, and they did all that in just 8 weeks. Now, on top of all that, the intervention group also lost 18% of their subcutaneous fat. Now, this was a very small study, but the direction is consistent with larger meta-analyses. And then there was something else that was fascinating in the study. The participants lost almost half of their visceral fat, but the scale stayed almost the same. And that's something I talk with my patients all the time. We can't live and die by the scale because it's a pretty poor metric of progress when it comes to visceral fat. So if you're doing all the right things, but the scale is not moving, that doesn't mean it's not working. Now, for most of these studies, they look at moderate to vigorous intensity, so at least 40 to 60% of maximum heart rate reserve. And a lot of smartwatches or fitness trackers nowadays can calculate this for you in real time. But keep in mind that we can't always rely on our heart rate to calculate these categories, because there could be some variations, especially if you're on medications like beta blockers, which can lower your heart rate. And a lot of these heart rate trackers, like in your Apple Watch or your Garmin, can also give you a heart rate zone to shoot for. So moderate intensity exercise would be somewhere in the zone 2 range, and vigorous intensity would be around zone 3 or zone 4. But once again, this relies on your heart rate, and these zone references are not really standardized between manufacturers. I think the easiest way to track this, and this is what I do, is to do a talk test. So you know you're in the moderate intensity zone if you can still talk comfortably in phrases or short sentences, but you're just slightly winded. And another way to think about it is you can still talk, but you can't sing. Now, a lot of that might sound intimidating, especially if this is not part of your routine, but moderate intensity doesn't mean sprinting. For a lot of people, especially if you're just starting out, this could be a brisk walk or walking uphill or cycling at a steady pace. And in the studies that showed the best results, participants didn't start at full intensity on day 1. They actually ramped up over several weeks to even several months. So the goal is to work your way up gradually to higher and higher intensity and not jump straight to the top, because that's how you injure yourself. And if you have a heart condition, definitely talk to your doctor to see what level of intensity is right for you, because everybody's different. So all you need is just 2 or 3 sessions per week, 45 minutes per session. And it really doesn't matter what type of exercise you choose as long as you incorporate intensity. And maybe even more important than that is consistency. Because a slow 20-minute walk done every day is much better than an all-out 60-minute HIIT session done once a week. And here's the part that changes this whole equation. There was a study published in the British Journal of Sports Medicine, and they found that with exercise, the more you do, the more visceral fat you lose. You lose it in a dose-dependent manner. But with caloric restriction, they did not see the same response. There was a ceiling to how much caloric restriction helps, but there was no ceiling to how much movement helps. So you absolutely do not need to starve yourself to lose visceral fat. Just target all the right foods that we talked about and aim for a small calorie deficit. But if you want to speed up the process, just pull the lever on aerobic exercise and intensity. Alright, I hope this was helpful. Stay healthy, and I'll see you in the next one.